So we've been exploring together Christina Baldwin's book, The Seven Whispers, and each of these whispers is like this little golden nugget that we can pull out whenever we need, whether it is the idea of maintaining peace of mind or moving at the pace of guidance or surrendering to surprise or any of the other gems and whispers that she suggests to us. But certainly this one that we're looking at today, the sixth of seven, the idea of loving the folks in front of us, is very much a spiritual practice and a spiritual commitment. It is so easy, as Jesus said, to love those who love us, right? Who think as we do, who act as we do, who see the world in the same way that we see the world. Those are the folks that are easy to love. And thank goodness we have plenty of those in our lives, right? To be able to enjoy that kind of closeness and that kind of ease and that kind of comfortable connection. But those of us who are committed to a spiritual path, a spiritual way of being, know that there is something more than just what comes easy, that there is something more than just loving those who are like us or who like us. It is about being able to go beyond that and to love deeper and to love more fully and to love more broadly and to love more unconditionally. It does not mean, it never means that we have to agree and see eye to eye. It does not mean that we don't still stay engaged and stand up for and participate in the things that are important to us, in the world that we want to create. But in the process of doing that, we never lose sight of the ultimate truth, that we are one, that the same divine presence that was in Jesus, that was in Gautama Buddha, that was in any avatar, any spiritual master or teacher that we love and adore and respect, that same divine presence is in us and is in every other person as well. And so while we do what is ours to do individually and collectively, to bring about a better world for our families, for our communities, for the bigger world itself, we never lose sight of the truth of the divine nature within each and every one of us. That's not easy, is it? I'll be honest, that's not easy for me. Maybe it's easy for you. That's not easy. That's not easy. But nobody ever said, I don't know of any spiritual teacher or any spiritual writing that ever suggested that this work is easy work. It's not work. It's not easy work, but it is important work. And I believe that you and I are here by divine appointment because there's something in our souls, something in our essence that recognizes that call and that invitation, and that we're willing to do the best job that we can. Are we going to get it right all the time? Of course not. Are we going to find times when we feel angry or sad or ashamed or like we've missed the mark? Of course we are. But we don't let any of those feelings that we need to feel keep us from remembering the highest and most important truth. And that is the essence of who and what each and every one of us is. It's at the core of what unity is all about. In unity terminology, the words that we use are to behold the Christ, which is another way of saying to behold the divine, to behold the God in one another. That is what we're here to do, to love the folks in front of us. In the chapter and in Christina's work of this idea of loving the folks in front of us, she brings forth the story of the three questions that Leo Tolstoy wrote about in 1903. Short story, The Three Questions. And it was three questions that a king had in his mind. This king wanted to be as successful as he could possibly be, and he thought that if he had the ultimate answer to these three questions, that he would be tremendously successful. And the questions were these: what is the right time for any action? The second question was, who are the most important people? And the third question was, what is the most important thing to do? Would you not agree that if you had the perfect answer to those questions, that could be a pretty cool thing? And so this king wanted to have the answer to those three questions because he felt that if he did, he would be a more, a more effective leader. And so he asked many wise men to give him answers, and they came up with all sorts of answers, but none of them seemed to be the right one. And yet this king knew of a hermit that lived in a far-off village, and he felt that this hermit, who was known to be very, very wise, if he could just ask the hermit about the answer to these three questions, he would finally have the right answer. So he went to visit the hermit, but being the king, he knew that he was going to have to go in disguise because the hermit only talked to ordinary people. And so the king went in disguise, but the king's guards wanted to make sure that the king was going to be safe. So they followed him up to a certain point and remained in the woods while the king, in disguise, went to the hermit to ask the hermit these questions. And he found the hermit tilling his garden. And he asked the hermit didn't look up from what he was doing, he asked the hermit these three questions. What is the right time for any action? Who are the most important people to listen to? And what is the most important thing to do? And as he asked these questions, the hermit completely ignored him. Can you imagine as a king how that might have been received? And so the hermit completely ignored him and went about doing his work. And so the king decided, well, maybe he should jump in and help the hermit tilling the garden. And so he did, and he asked the questions again. And the hermit still ignored him. And when he went to ask another time, just as he was about to ask, and he's still not getting any answers, a man stumbled into the village, deeply wounded, bleeding from the stomach. And the king and the hermit looked up, and the king decided to reach out to this man who was very, very wounded and to offer help. And so he offered help, and this wounded man spent the night with the king and spent the night with the hermit. And in the morning, the wounded man was much better, but he was incredulous because he confessed that he actually knew that the man in disguise was the king, and he had come with the intent to kill the king because the king had harmed this man's brother. And yet it was the king who responded to that wounded man in the immediacy of the moment, and the wounded man was incredulous and asked the king for his forgiveness. And eventually the wounded man went off. And the king once again tried to ask the hermit, well, what are the answers to my questions? And of course, the hermit said, you already got your answers. You got your answers. The most important time is now. The most important person is the person you are with. The most important thing to do, the most important action is to help the person in front of you. You did these things. You did these things. I think Tolstoy in this story captures the idea that what we're called to do doesn't take a whole lot of strategizing or figuring out in some ways. It's right there in front of us. It's right there in front of us. There was a line in the Michael Gott song that Jimmer sang that speaks to this as well. Look around you. There's someone around you who is hurting. Look around you. In other words, we all have a place to make a positive difference. We all have a place to make a connection with another, a connection that can be healing, a connection that can be uplifting, a connection that can make a significant difference in that person's life. But what does it require of us? It requires of us to pay attention, right? To be present. In fact, so much of spiritual training and practice, I think, is about being present, meaning being aware, being present in the moment in such a way that we see what needs to be seen. We recognize where there might be a hurt or a misunderstanding or an opportunity to engage, to lift our voices and to defend or to protect or to bring forth truth, to bring forth honesty, to bring forth decency. But it's about recognizing the moment, the opportunity, and realizing it's right there in front of us. That we in that moment, I think, are the minds, the hands, the heart, the feet of Spirit, the feet of God. This whisper to love the folks in front of us is an invitation to look for the good within each other, to look for the good in every situation, knowing, I mean, those words sound so sweet and lovely, and they can be difficult to do, though, right? To look for the good in every situation. It's there. Sometimes we have to look really hard to find it. To look for the good in the other that we think is so different from us, and we wonder how in the world could they see things the way they see them. Have you found yourself in that question at all this week? I have most of my family is at the complete opposite end of the spectrum when it comes to political issues from me. And I know they're good people. I love them with all my heart and soul. And I wonder, how can you see things so differently than I do? Do you have anyone like that in your life? Of course, that's probably why we're in this room together right now, just to kind of take a breath and... But to realize at the same time that those of us feel that are clapping, also recognize that there are those who are so very different and see things so very differently than we do. But that does not mean that we should treat one another without love. It does not mean that we should not still wish for and work for the highest and best in each other, even though that work is difficult, and even though that work can be really messy at times. If we don't do that work mindfully, how else is that work going to get done, right? How else is that work going to get done? There are people, and Christina writes about this in the book, there are people that we can't get away from easily. Think about Thanksgiving for you. Think about who you might be sharing Thanksgiving with that you love and adore, who might be in a very different mindset than you are, right? These are probably the people that would fall under that category of people that you can't get away from. We can pick our friends, right? We can pick our lovers, we can pick our life partners, but we don't usually pick our families unless we want to go down a whole other spiritual soul road that I'm not going to go down right now, okay? But for the most part, it feels like we don't pick our families. We land in the families that we land in. And there are people that we just don't get away from. And yet these are the very people that we are invited to step into a deeper practice of understanding. And I think that one of the important and missing pieces of this idea of loving those that are difficult for us to love is the importance of understanding their story. The importance of understanding their story. I remember in one of the synthesis dialogues that we had with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, that we had people from all around the world, leaders and activists from all around the world. And I will never forget one of the most powerful conversations was between an Israeli and a Palestinian. And they were talking in front of this whole group, and they got into a discussion about peace, and they got into a discussion about different ideologies. Now, this goes back to either the late 1990s or the very early 2000s. They got into this very heated discussion right in the midst of us when we were all trying to be on our very best behavior for His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who was also in the room at the same time. But there was a moment of shifting in that conversation that I will never forget. And it was a moment of shifting that was based on personal story. It was no longer based on ideology or theology. The two started to talk about very basic shared human things like their families, their kids, and their grandkids. And all of a sudden, the way these two started to interact shifted dramatically. And we all had the opportunity to witness this first step toward healing, which was created or initiated because of a connection of understanding the other. Take that in for a moment. The idea of understanding the other person, why they are as they are, what have been their life experiences, what have been their joys, their challenges, their hurts, their fears, their wants, their disappointments. Understanding another's story, understanding another's journey helps us to open or at least soften our hearts a little bit, to be able to hold a kinder thought, a more loving thought toward the other. We are so much more alike than we are different in the ways that matter. But I think where we get hung up are the superficial ways that we are different. If you think about it, most people cry or laugh or are afraid or are filled with hope by kind of fundamentally the same sorts of things. Would you not agree? When we cry, the deepest tears, the deepest sadness, it's usually for some of the very same kinds of things that bring us to our knees. It is that shared humanity that is so important for us, especially as spiritually committed beings, to remember and to never, ever, ever lose sight of. To be willing in the simplest of ways to do what we can to keep that kind of connection with one another. To not shut down because we think that we are so different on some very basic levels, but to not shut down and to stay open and present. Is that easy to do? No, it's not easy to do. But as I said earlier, there's no place I'm aware of, and correct me if you find one, there's no place where any real spiritual master or teacher claims that this is easy practice. In our heads it might be. It makes sense up here, does it not? It makes sense up here. But when we are needing to live it out in the nitty-gritty messiness of human relationships, that's where it gets pretty darn difficult. But if we can always keep a part of ourselves open to recognizing the humanity and the divinity within the other, we will go a long way toward co-creating a world that can work for everyone. I think we're brought to this time in our country, at this point in history, because we are being invited to try to figure out how to work with one another. No matter which way our election would have gone, if it had gone completely the other direction, we would still be left with some of the very same human, I'm not talking about political problems now, the very same human problems that we have right now. And that is that we have forgotten, I think it was Martin Luther King Jr. who used these words, we have forgotten that we belong to each other. We have forgotten that we belong to each other. No matter who would have won, we're still left with this deep divide. And the political divide, to me, is not nearly as sad or worrisome as the human and heart divide is. That's what we need to heal. That's what we need to heal. I don't know what your steps are toward that. I'm going to be figuring out what my steps are toward that. I want to remain engaged. I want to do whatever I can spiritually and every other way to help heal that, because I care about our human family, and I believe you do too. Do you not? Do you believe? You can clap for that. Do you believe that you have something that you can say or do or a way of being that can make a difference? Do you? I believe in you. I believe in you no matter how you voted. And I hope you believe in me no matter how I voted. That belief in each other is important. I'm going to close with a piece that a friend of mine wrote. This is a person, she doesn't know I'm sharing this, but it was on her Facebook post, and I am seldom on Facebook, but I happened to see this. It was written by my friend Candy Conradi. She and I are about the same age. She and I found Unity at what is now called Unity San Diego, but at the time was called Christchurch Unity, both when we were like in our late teens, very, very early 20s. At that time, we were the only young people sitting in that congregation. And we used to say, look at all the gray and blue hair around us. How judgmental we were, because now we are that ourselves. And this is something she wrote, and I thought she really touched upon some important things that deal with the times, but also invite us to look at never, ever, ever, ever forgetting that we belong to each other and to love the folks in front of us. And so she wrote, "To my friends, the ones who voted for Harris, the ones who voted for the winner, I'm writing this to all of you. For those of you celebrating, we understand because we celebrated with equal joy 4 years ago. We are feeling the hangover that you probably felt at that time. So be kind and understanding for the many reasons we feel this way. There are many unanswered questions, and we have yet to see the fallout from this election. I do believe there will be one, and you, like those of us who voted first for Biden and then for Harris, will feel the hangover we are feeling today. It's never easy when you're on the other side. But please know that our grief is very real. Many of us have people we love who are going to face dire consequences of this election in real time. I'm not going to list all the things that could or might happen because I don't know. What I do know is that there is more probability to our fears than there is possibility. But in the end, kindness is all that matters. In the end, kindness is all that matters." Join me in taking a deep breath in. Releasing that breath, and maybe making a connection in your heart for a moment. And just feeling that connection of the heart. And feeling into the bigger truth of the divine essence that resides in you and the divine essence that resides in every other being. And do your very best to feel into that for a moment. To hold that, to know that that actually is absolutely true with a capital T. To know as well that to the extent that you keep your mind open, your heart open, your ears open, and a willing spirit, that you will know what is your next right step, that you will know how to be part of the path that brings us to a place of healing, that no matter what way elections go, that we can heal this very sad divide in our family. So hold that in your heart. Hold that in your heart. I'll close with these words. Jimmer shared them with me. It's from a piece from Still We Rise, Instructions on Living in a Broken World. Lean into community. Seek out love. Applaud the good you see. Keep paying attention. Talk to your neighbors. Dance to the music and embrace art. Look for love and small joys. Take breaks and relish in nourishing your body. Donate what you can. Linger at the dinner table with friends. Check in with your people. Let yourself grieve. Love one another as deeply as you can. The storm is upon us, and we must hold on. Don't give up. We're here together. Amen.